Today, we're going to be talking about therapies and how to heal after narcissistically abusive relationship. I know that one of the things I really struggled with was getting my feet back on the ground, starting to feel like my old self again after I got out of that toxic relationship. And as a psychologist, you'd think it would be instinctual, that this would be something really simple, straightforward, but it actually is not you think it is. I had done 20 years of individual and family and couples counseling myself as a clinician, as a mental health clinician. I'm a retired psychologist in the day, but at the time I was a practicing psychologist. And when I got out of that toxic relationship, you'd think that I would have just known what I needed to do to heal, but I found that it wasn't as simple as I thought. I when I look at all the different types of disorders that there are under the sun, I'm thinking, for example, the ones that lead to a more psychotic break, as well as the ones that lead to are rooted in relationship difficulties, and then there's the trauma-based ones, as well as the ones that were like developmental or organic problems. That there are a whole host of different things that happen behind the scenes that make each one kind of unique and need a specific type of treatment and approach. And so most of us approach therapy sort of from a perspective of what's called top down or bottom up therapies. Now, bottom up types of treatments are newer. That we tend to think when we think of counseling, we tend to think of what's called down types of treatments. And so what the problem is that just like one car doesn't fit every need. I mean, if, for example, if you're a farm, you don't want to have a sedan, especially you don't want to have one of those cars with like a two-seater, one of those racing cars that would not be practical on a farm. Like, how are you going to load heavy things and move it around? You're going to need a heavy-duty truck. In the same way, treatment isn't just the same for every type of disorder. You need a specific type of treatment to fit a specific type of disorder. So a lot of times we get out of these toxic relationships and we think that what we know worked maybe for our depression, maybe what it worked for a parent-child issue, maybe it worked when we were in a healthier relationship with somebody. We think it's going to work for healing for narcissistic abuse. Excuse me, but unfortunately it doesn't. It's not it's not quite that simple. So today I want to get into these areas with you. I want to talk about different types of treatments. What's the difference between a top-down therapy from a bottom-up therapy? I want to also talk about what your healing strategy should look like from a very holistic perspective. And then I want to also then talk about some specific types of therapy, some that I've done, and give you my sense of what it was like, what I learned, would I do it again, what was helpful about it, what was not helpful about it. And then, excuse me. And then I want to end by taking your questions of things that you're struggling with when it comes to healing from narcissistic abuse. So maybe you've been in treatment and it's not going as well as you thought it would, and you wonder, is this normal? What should you expect and not expect? Maybe you're with a clinician who doesn't actually understand what you're going through, and you're wondering, is this even the right person? Should I look for somebody different? What would that look like if I was to look for somebody different? So I want to be able to take your questions. I want to make sure today that I don't run out of time. I'm here for the full hour. We're not in a rush. So I'm super excited to be with you guys today to talk about treatments for narcissistic abuse. So let's start out by talking about top-down versus bottom-up therapies and how the differences between the two, because I have a feeling if you're like me, you probably even didn't know that there was such a thing of different types of therapies, the top-down versus bottom-up. So what does that even mean when you hear that? So top-down therapy, think of it this way. It's like using your head, like putting a cap on top of your head. So top-down treatments are things like talk therapy. They're things like cognitive behavioral specifically, as well as psychodynamic or insight oriented. They're things that challenge your beliefs, the way you look at the world, helping you develop a healthier coping strategy. It's everything that uses your mind. So think of it that way. It's things that use your mind. So top-down therapies are things that have to do with thinking and perspective and analyzing things, everything that you use your brain for. Bottom-up therapies are more somatic, which means that's a fancy way of saying body. It's more of a body focus. It's like experiencing what's happening in your body. I know that you may have seen that I did a series a while back, a couple years back, about grounding techniques and anchoring and all sorts of things like that. That would be a great example of bottom up therapies. You guys may have tried EMDR or brain spotting. Therapeutic yoga is another great form of a somatic therapy. And now there's new somatic therapies coming on board. Things like Mind Bloom is offering like an in-home guided use of a special medication to help you. I need to be careful because I'm on multiple formats here, so I don't really want to like get very specific about the medication itself, but Mind Bloom is one of those that you may have seen me posting about lately. That's also offering a bottom-up form of therapy. It's offering more of a somatic kind of holistic tuning in to yourself and to your body, how you feel, so that you can relearn safety. Because one of the things that happens in a narcissistically abusive relationship is we come out of these relationships in a chronic state of flight or fight. Now, on most of the time, that state should be just temporary. It's something that should just last for whatever the emergency is. Our body's built for survival. It's built to help you cope with, say somebody, for example, came in and threatened you right now, really freaked you out. Your body is wired to know what it needs to do to be able to handle that threat in that moment. But unfortunately, when you get in these toxic relationships, we're surrounded by a person who's actually threatening us in all sorts of ways, covertly, overtly. Maybe there's gaslighting. You don't know what's actually true or real. And you feel this in your body. Your body is probably more aware than your brain is that something is wrong, something's not computing. And you start to feel just stirred up, like, I don't know what's wrong, but it feels like something's wrong, and I don't know why I feel like it's something wrong. And then you find yourself jumpy, you can't focus, you're struggling to remember things, maybe you're struggling to sleep really well, but you start to have all these ramifications that comes from being in this chronic state or fight or flight. Now, every single one of us reacts a little differently. That's why there's 4 types of reactions. There's some of us come out swinging. We may come out just like irritable and aggressive and curt. Some of us may come out more like avoidant. We like back off and we don't really know what to say and we get really quiet, or we just sort of retreat and withdraw. Some of us start to like try to rescue and solve everything. We become fixers. We fawn a lot. We try to like placate people. And then some of us just sort of go immobile and shut down altogether, and that's called freezing. So if you see yourself like in one of these modes, that may be saying to you, you're in a chronic state of fight or fright, that you don't feel safe, and this has been the way you're reacting is a way to stay safe. It's just to sort of always be on edge and irritable, or you're totally checked out and withdrawn and walking away from everything, or maybe you're trying to fix everything. That can be an evidence that you're in one of these fight or flight states. So you get into one of these states. See, it's not just that it's a thinking problem. That's the problem with narcissistic abuse. It's not just a thinking problem. It's not like, if my partner and I could just figure out how to better solve conflict, we'd fix all of this. Or another thing a lot of us suggest out there, if we just get better at boundaries without realizing that a boundary to a narcissist is like waving the red flag to a bull, you've now invited a challenge. We end up having all these solutions that are kind of cognitive based or problem solving based, not realize that living in this chronic state of fight and flight is doing all sorts of like ramifications and damages to our sense of self and to even the state of the body. One of the things that really alarmed me when I got out of that toxic relationship and started understanding better what a trauma bond is, what cognitive dissonance is, which is that confusion, it can't figure out what's real or true about your relationship, that it actually does neurological brain damage. You're actually impacting your cognition, the way you think and function and make decisions. And so we come out of these relationships, we wonder why we feel so terrible. Well, there's a lot of parts and pieces that we have to address. You have to first break out of a trauma bond. You have been, if you heard the podcast with Daniela Messanek-Young, then you learned that a narcissistic relationship is essentially a cult of 2. So you walk out of these relationships and you've been brainwashed and spellbound and mesmerized by somebody who's but powerfully using your innate desire and need to be connected and to belong to another person. They've been using that hard wiring for belonging, their attachment for love against you. They have quietly, in overt and covert ways, threatened that connection. So you get out of these relationships and you're edgy and you find yourself doing all sorts of extra work and you don't really know why, and you can't stop thinking about the narcissist, and you keep wondering what they're up to, and you wonder if they're better off without you, and you wonder if they need you as much as you need them, and you have all of this like swirl. I mean, I felt like a crazy woman when I came out of that relationship. I wanted to stop. I mean, the amount of hours, guys, I spent going through past stuff. Now, granted, I was writing a book, but I'll tell you, writing a book gave me a great excuse in a way to sink myself into the material, because I desperately wanted to make sense of what happened to me. And so I was trying to like go through all of this to figure out like timelines. And I had several backups of his phone, so I started like combing his phone and trying to find every like little shred of evidence. I did find some things that was shocking, that was very, very disturbing, that I made massive ahas. So it did give me more information. But I'll tell you, as much as I got more info, it didn't solve what was happening inside me. It didn't make the interior part of me feel safer and connected and at peace. I just felt more stirred up and worse. I wonder if you guys are noticing that you're feeling very stirred up, and it doesn't help to do all of this. So we have to break the trauma bond. In fact, Lisa, Sunny, and I, the expert in trauma bonds, are launching a new group coaching program that's going to start in January. Right now, I just put up a link. It's not currently in the notes for Facebook and YouTube, but it is in my links. So if you go to Kerry McAvoy PhD /links with a plural, links, it's the top line. It's called Trauma Bond Cycle Explained. So if you want to understand what a trauma bond is, you want to understand what the 3 stages are, what the cycle is, that's a free download to anyone who's interested. Just go to kerrymcavoyphd.com /links, and you can download that free explanation of a trauma bond. But we're going to offer a 12-week group coaching starting January 8th for those of you who really want like honed in, focused help breaking a trauma bond. So yeah, we come out with a trauma bond. We're like confused in our head. Our body's in a state of chronic fight or flight. We don't really actually know what we've survived. And then here's the other thing that starts to, we discover, we may have known it in the middle of that relationship, but now that we're out, it's become really clear. And that is our support system has been trashed, literally trashed. Now, it may have been because of that relationship. Your partner or loved one or family member, whoever was doing this, may have been trying to subtly like move you away from the key people in your life and isolating you. They certainly do that. Mine got me to discontinue my closest relationship. He said it threatened him and made him feel like he was going to act out more and do more bad things. So I dropped that relationship out of safety, thinking that's going to protect us, not knowing that I was actually isolating myself from some really good support. And I bet you a lot of you have done the same, that you have like eliminated people from your life because your partner didn't like them. Maybe they felt, your partner told you they felt like this person was judging them whenever they were around, or something that happened whenever you had contact with this person. Or here's another really subtle way. They find like not just overt ways, but really subtle ways to sort of create separation between us and other people. And another really subtle way is to say, I don't think that person likes me. And then just start to make you question whether or not your friend does like them, or whether or not one of your family members like them. Or they'll do this. They'll never give you a moment alone to take a phone call. So, or even your texts, somehow you find out all your texts are being monitored and read. So you start to feel like, I can't say anything because anything that I do, this person's in the middle of, and I have no privacy. And so you just quietly start to not contact people as much as you were before. So you get out of these relationships and you discover, I don't have any friends anymore. And then you discover this another really nasty thing, and that is when you do share, nobody gets it. Everybody thinks that you're making up stuff too much, or that it couldn't be that bad because that person is so nice in public, or that everybody has it bad. You're just like being extreme. You're like somehow catastrophizing, and don't you know that we all have it bad? Well, they don't understand what it's been like in your relationship, because you have kept it from them, but because it's hard to explain all of this, because you sound crazy saying some of the things that you do. You don't know how to explain why you stayed so long with all this toxic stuff going on. I mean, all of this stuff, you just don't know. You don't know how to explain it. So you get out of these relationships and you're very dysregulated. You're very attached to this person. Now you have all this emptiness, big questions, huge emotions that you may not be aware of, and maybe you're aware of, that are just plaguing you, and you're trying to heal. So a lot of us do what we know, and what we've been told through our whole life is go get counseling. Just go get counseling. That will help you. Not knowing that most counselors haven't been trained in narcissistic abuse. They don't really know what you're talking about. They come from the model that every person is fully autonomous and has full control over what happens in that relationship. So it took two to tango. So if there's problems, then you've been part of the problem. I'll tell you, because as a psychologist who saw couples, and I now know I probably saw some narcissistically abused individuals in my office, and I had no clue. I had no clue what I was seeing. And I just told you what I told them. I didn't help them. I was probably hurtful. Unfortunately, I'm sick to say I was probably hurtful, because most clinicians, the amount of training we receive on abuse in general in graduate school is sickening. It could create, I don't even know if it would fill a book. I don't even think it would fill a book. It's so brief. You have to elect to take a course. I elected. Otherwise, you go to weekend seminars. Okay, how much do you guys learn when your business requires you to go to a weekend seminar? How much do you learn in those 2 days? Not a lot, right? You walk in because you have to do, it's mandatory. And then you don't walk out with a whole lot of information. It's not an interest of yours. You think, oh, I'm never going to see this group, so why do I need to focus and learn anything from it? So you don't get a lot out of it. Now, I actually took a class on domestic violence, but at the time, that was really just focusing on overt, like physically violent relationships, dangerous relationships. Now, I'm not saying a narcissistically abusive relationship isn't dangerous. It is. But it focused mostly on what we would consider as more domestic violence cases, not on emotional abuse situations. No, I'm probably dating myself. Hopefully that's changed. Now, there are some new certifications coming out. Dr. Ramani is leading up one of them. Sandra Brown's leading up another one that's coming out for clinicians that they can take and become certified. And so they actually can have a specialty, and you can go and see this person's certification. But again, you have to elect to do that. And we're only talking hundreds of therapists. We're not talking thousands of therapists or thousands of psychiatrists, social workers, and psychologists. So what I'm saying is the average therapist that you're running into, or the average psychiatrist you're running into, hasn't been trained in the dynamics of narcissistically abusive relationships. They may know about trauma, and they may know that there are emotionally abusive relationships, but they don't know a whole lot about the dynamics that happen. They may never have heard of chronic and persistent cognitive dissonance. They may not know what a trauma bond is or how to break one. So you get out of these, and people say, well, go get counseling. So you do that thinking you're getting really great help, and you don't know, and you walk into a counselor who has no idea what you've just experienced and cannot really actually help, because their advice is going to be the wrong advice. It's going to be great advice if you're just a normal, healthy couple struggling with conflict, or a person who's went through just a normal divorce and who's struggling to have an amicable relationship with a fairly decent person. That would work, but that's not what you're experiencing. So that's why top-down therapies often are not the only course. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to tell you how to find a good therapist, the words you should be asking, or the questions you'd be asking, and the words you should be looking for when you actually look for a clinician. But bottom-up therapies is something that's being tremendously overlooked, but I want to tell you that you really need to add that as part of your treatment. And bottom-up therapies are things that focus on the body, on the whole experience, your whole self. And right now, the list is kind of more limited, unfortunately. I wish it was broader, but there's such things as therapeutic yoga. There's also EMDR, which I don't know if you guys know what that is. I had a little bit of it. It's really interesting. It stands for I don't know if I can do this. Rapid eye movement. I don't know. I'm already doing it wrong. Yeah, I'm sorry. Here it is. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. That's what it stands for. So what it does is it uses bilateral stimulation. What does that mean? Okay, your brain has two hemispheres. has right and left, and actually they're separate. They have a separate identity. When they have separated the brain, the corpus callosum is the connectors, the highway that connects these two halves. When they've disconnected it and just talked to one half, it's very different from the other half. They actually even argue with each other. Isn't that wild? But what happens is they do this bilateral stimulation. It could be with your eyes, with what you see, could be what you hear, it could be one of your senses, but they do this bilateral stimulation, like tapping one leg and the other, or having you watch lights that blink from one eye to, one eye to the other, or listen to sounds from one ear to the other while you remember troubling memories. And interestingly enough, doing this actually separates your trauma response, your reaction, your dysregulation from the memory, so that you can recall the memories more clear and freer than you did before. I had a client who happened to be one of those massive highway pileups, like 50, 100 cars, where it's bad. I mean, often we don't think about it because you never like slow down and think about what happens in a pileup. But when that amount of cars with the gas tanks leaking and more pileups happening, and then there's sparks, it means there's a fire and there's people screaming and you smell stuff burning. I mean, it's really actually awful. I never thought about it until I had a client who came in who survived one of those. This woman had survived this massive pileup on a big turnpike. And she came in with all sorts of trauma stuff, and we sent her over for trauma for EMDR, and it was so helpful for her. It really helped kind of calm down her reaction and helped her feel more regulated and more in charge of her body and her senses. So it can be very powerful. Then brain spotting is something really similar. It's like an offshoot of EMDR. But there's also now like therapies, like yoga therapies that you can do. So be aware that there's all sorts of these new things that are happening. I think Reiki is another one that's coming out. I know I get kind of edgy about some of this because some of it tends to be more in the new age camp or more spiritual camp. But there are clinicians, I do know, because when I go to these big national conferences, that there are clinicians who are actually like trying to learn these new techniques. I, in fact, have a whole series on YouTube that's a playlist on how to anchor yourself, how to ground yourself, different types of sensory experiences that you can do to be able to really helpful. That's really helpful. I know DBT teaches a lot of that, how to do somatic comforting. And then there's now this new treatments that are coming out from companies like MindBloom, who's using it's kind of off-shelf use of FDA previously approved meds for other things, and then they're using it as a way to then create a state of calmness and increase your neuroplasticity. Now, what does that mean? So normally, way back in the day, we used to think that the brain wasn't fluid, that once you grew up and you were who you were, that you were an unchangeable, your brain was unchangeable. We used to say that neurons never grew back. Like, for example, if you damage a tongue cell, that it heals. Your tongue heals really fast. But our thought was, well, in the brain, that it doesn't heal at all, and that whatever you lose, you've permanently lost. Well, now we realize maybe you don't grow neurons super fast, but the neurons communicate like a superhighway. They're actually webbed together with these big, huge, intricate connections, and it's based on use and disuse. So the more you use these connections, the richer and stronger that connection grows, so it gets faster. And when you stop using it over time, that connection actually dies away. And so we've understand that there are chemicals, there are medications that can actually increase the brain's openness to create new connections. And MindBloom's one of them is offering a treatment to be able to do that. Now, those of you who are interested, see my other videos on it, because I go into more depth on what happened, what it was like for me, because I did do their 6 treatment in-home guided sessions. It was incredible. It was really incredible. I felt really peaceful. And then I made a lot of like ahas, things that I hadn't really connected before, because you journal before you do the treatment and then you journal afterwards. And one of the big ahas I had, and I hadn't realized this, because I grew up in a toxic family system where healthiness was trashed. Anybody healthy was sort of seen as uncool and even dangerous. I mean, think about it. When you're around a toxic person, they don't like healthy people. They don't. They despise healthiness. It's actually a risk, because that means that person's not open to their manipulation. So in this big family system that I was in with a lot of unhealthy people, they were really negative about anybody who had healthy boundaries. They talked about them behind their backs. There was a active smear campaign. They were sarcastic and contemptuous. And I hadn't realized that affected me, that for me to feel like I wanted to belong, I had to sort of stay, in the family pattern, stay cool to the family. And one of the things experienced through this Mind Bloom treatment experience was that's not actually true, that healthy people welcome healthy people. And I had never realized I didn't put that combination together before, that healthiness attracts healthiness, and that actually unhealthiness attracts unhealthiness. So it was really expanding for me to think of that. So that's another thing for you to consider, is adding that as an opportunity or a thing that you might want to consider. If you're feeling stuck, you might want to reach out to a company like Mind Bloom and ask them, are you a good candidate for their treatment, so that you can make these new connections for yourself and look at what your unconscious holdups are. So those are the difference between top-down and bottom-down therapies. So what does it look like to put together the best treatment plan for you? Let's pretend that you all are your own case manager. You've come out of these relationships and you need help, and you want to put together your package for yourself that's going to give you the best bang for the buck so that you can heal and recover from a toxic relationship. I would include these things. I would want you to get into a trauma-informed therapy. Okay, what does that actually mean? That means finding somebody who understands what betrayal trauma is, what narcissistic abuse is. And how I would do it is I would actually go ask questions before I ever saw the therapist. I would say, do you know what narcissistic abuse is? What's your opinion about the statement that it takes two to tango? Have you gotten any type of continuing education on narcissistic abuse? I would ask that. I've had clients ask me pretty pointed questions before coming in. It is not out of line for you to interview the clinician as much as they're interviewing you. Please remember that. You're the customer. You're selecting them. It's not them selecting you. So the power sits with you. Consider interviewing this clinician by asking these types of questions. But I would include some form of therapy, like trauma-informed therapy, and I would make sure it included holistic treatments as well, whether that's EMDR, brain spotting, whether that's some kind of somatic experiencing like Mind Bloom. I would encourage it to kind of have this holistic approach to my mental health. That's the first thing I would do. Number 2, I would add a support group. Why? Why add a support group? Because, guys, you are isolated. I cannot tell you the number of people that I have met at one of my retreats or met in one of my groups who have told me that one of the things that is just destroying them is how alone they feel, how nobody understands what they're going through, and that they start to wonder if maybe they're the problem, maybe they're the crazy one. Isolation is going to cause you to think that issue is you, and the issue isn't you. The issue is what you've survived. So please find support. And I've said it before, and some of you have taken me up on it, and I'm thrilled. I have a toxic-free relationship club. I know it's not cheap, because you get four coaching sessions in a month. It costs $75 a month. But I'll tell you, I have people in there who are paying as low as $5. Why? Because they had the courage to step out and ask me for help, and I always say yes. If you come to me and say, Kerry, I really want to be a part of it, but I can't afford it, I can only afford a few dollars, I'm happy to let you in for a few dollars. So please don't let your budget restrain you from getting help. So 1, get a trauma-informed therapy that's holistic. Number 2, add a support group. Number 3, educate. Now, I know a lot of you already do this naturally. In fact, a lot of you put that first. That's the first thing that you do, is you go out on YouTube or you go onto TikTok or Facebook and you start to search narcissistic abuse as much as you can and then just absorb all this information. That's really good. Make sure, but it should be number 3, not number 1. And make sure you're adding some really good literature in there. Like read Dr. Vander Kolk's book called The Body Keeps the Score, or Kristen Milstead books called Why Can't I Just Leave? Or you might want to check out Patrick Carmen's book called The Betrayal Bonds. Make sure you're including things from experts who really know a whole lot. Right now, I'm wrapping up the book called Feeling Unreal on Depersonalization. It's something we're reading in the Toxic Free Relationship Club. So make sure you're really getting a holistic picture of what actually is happening. So number 3 is is psychological education. Number 4, I want you to start mind-body practices. Now, what do I mean by that? Means like getting out and walking. Maybe in the beginning you can just walk around the block. Maybe it means taking a cup of coffee out on the back deck and just sitting in the quiet. Not scrolling on the phone, just sitting in the quiet. Maybe it means going to some YouTubes or other videos and trying some mindfulness practice or breath work, but start to use things that cause you to center back into yourself, with yourself, so that you're back in touch with yourself. So that's number 4. Include mind-body practices. Number 5, I want you to start setting some boundaries. What does that mean? Well, boundaries is not this. I want you to stop doing that. It's not telling somebody what not to do or what to do more. It's what you decide you're going to do when that person starts doing whatever it is that's really upsetting you. Like if they start criticizing me, I'm just going to say, you know what? I need to do something else and turn around and walk out of the room. It means you setting internal boundaries with yourself about what you will allow and what you won't allow in your life. Number 6, I want you to start rebuilding your identity. Now, I know this is a big thing, and that may even say like, well, Kerry, how in the world do I do that? Well, it starts really small, like asking yourself, what do I like? Do I have a hobby? Maybe I should try something. And you know what? Even if I don't like it and I spend a little money on it, it's okay because I'm learning something new about myself. Am I eating what I really like to eat? Who do I really want in my life and why? It's asking these basic questions and starting to learn who you are and see it sort of like a discovery, like the same way that you would with a new friend. Do this with yourself. Kind of start to rebuild this connection with you like you would with a new friend. Number 7, coaching and mentorship is really valuable. It can be extraordinarily helpful, and you can do that in conjunction with a therapist. Sometimes some of us need number 8, which is pharmacological support. We may need some medication to help us out. And then, of course, you're going to want to just think about everything that has to do with creating a loving, more supportive environment around you. It may mean those that you actually trust and believe in and know that are non-judgmental. It might mean that you start to help them get educated on abuse. Maybe it means you start to turn them on to your favorite podcast or share a video that you found extraordinarily helpful, but start to include those around you so that you can build your relationship with other people so that it's helpful as well. So that's a real quick and fast way to build the perfect narcissistic abuse survival kit for yourself when you get out of these toxic relationships. I know I just threw a whole lot at you. So, and I also promised today that I'm going to take your questions because I often talk so long that I push you guys out and then you have very little time to actually ask me anything. So I've got my glasses on and I'm going to start to read your questions and comments about this. So what of everything that I just shared maybe doesn't make sense, or maybe you're really struggling with, maybe you'd like to know more about? By the way, one of the things I've made sure that I do is that I offer help on all these levels. So if you're really struggling with, maybe you don't know how to find a good therapist, I do offer very limited consulting, and I can help you connect to find somebody in your area that's good. Now, unfortunately, some of you, oh, thank you. I appreciate you like my earrings. Some of you ask for clinicians in your area. Here's the problem with that. Here's why I can't be helpful. I'm not able to suggest who to see in your area because you have to, in order for it to be reimbursable by insurance, you need to see somebody in your state who's licensed to practice in your state, who's part of the insurance network. Can you imagine? I don't even know how insurance companies do it with their own providers. There's no way I'm going to know somebody, for example, who lives in Idaho. I don't know anybody in Idaho. I may, on an offshoot, have a rare connection, maybe in the San Francisco Bay Area, maybe back in the middle of Michigan, or maybe I may know somebody, because I know somebody that lives in the Sarasota area or Florida. I might know of a few people, but generally I have no clue on who you should see. But what I can tell you, a really great suggestion is for you to reach out to, or contact, to log into Psychology Today's directory, put in the words narcissistic abuse, and generally clinicians tend to be a pretty conscientious group. They tend to be pretty honest about what they can deal with because one of our ethical oaths, I don't know if you knew that, we have 10 ethical oaths, and one of them is that we practice within our competency. So generally, if somebody says, I'm competent in this area, they are, because otherwise they wouldn't do that. It would just be, it would feel, I mean, they would be violating their own standard as a clinician. So generally, you can kind of trust if people say, I'm good with this, then generally they have experience with that. So, oh yeah, and I agree, Kate. Psychology Today also has really great articles to read. In fact, clinicians write those articles. So yeah, and they often, if you look at the top, they have been validated by another clinician. Often there's like, so-and-so has reviewed this and approved. So you'll see that there's like this double process that happens that double checks it. Yeah, so it's like, thank you for suggesting that. I'm sorry, Isabel. So Isabel said, actually, her experience with therapists is they're not honest about what they can do. It breaks your heart. I am sorry that's been an experience. I have to tell you, here's kind of a bad thing. And Miriam, I do see your question. I'll make sure to get over it. A bad thing about any position of power attracts toxic element. Let me say that again. Any position of power attracts a bad element. So anytime you have a big movement, any movement, you name the movement, you're going to find that toxic people start to move in there because there's power. And clinicians, I can tell you, I knew who was the narcissist in the area that I practice in. I knew we all knew who they were. We all talked about that so-and-so was a narcissist and so-and-so was a narcissist. And yeah, there are unscrupulous ones. So you have to approach finding the right, I agree with you, Trey. If you guys don't follow Dr. Trey ODT, please do. He's fantastic. He's now a doctor in occupational therapy. But I agree, Trey. Finding a good clinician is like finding the right dance partner or finding the right dating partner. You have to like go in being a little skeptical and having them to sort of prove it to you, prove it that they're the right one for you. But you'll know the fit. You'll feel these things. You'll feel like unconditional regard. You'll feel no judgment. You'll feel like there's like no shame being attached to you. They're not going to like make you feel small. So use the same things as everything that you look for in a relationship. Look for with a therapist. You should feel safe. You should feel accepted. Your therapist, every therapist who's a good therapist falls a little in love with every client. You want to feel that. If you don't feel your therapist likes you, it's not a good relationship. There's something wrong. My clients knew that I had their back and that I loved them. I actually really loved them. I cared deeply, deeply about them. So if you don't feel that, that's not the right therapist for you. Marion asked a question. How did I start writing my book? That's a really, you know what, when you first start writing a book, and I wrote the book Love You More, it's daunting. It's like, you know how they always say you face that white screen, you know, the white page on the screen? It does feel like that. But what I started doing for me was I just started sharing from the top, like what happened? How do I met this person? What state was I in? There's a really great, if you want to write a memoir, and a lot of us get out of these relationships and we want to write our story, which is what it's called, a memoir, I would recommend you get the book, and you have to buy it. It's not on Kindle. It's a paperback book. It's called Your Life as Story by Tristan, Tristin, Tristan, like Kristen with a T, Tristan Reiner, Rain, I think Ier, Tristan Reiner, Your Life as Story. It's sold on Amazon. That's how I started. I started writing chronologically. I have to say, it took me about a year to write the first draft and then 2 years to write the whole thing. And I wrote 9 editions of it. So I learned a whole lot about writing. I also, by the way, got into writers groups who are filled with writers who are actually literally writing and held me responsible to write. That all of that helped. So it was all, you know, it was definitely a process where I learned on the go. I'm a self-taught writer. I am not I do not have a PhD or even a bachelor's in English. Actually, I was one of those kids that went into school. I made a grimace because I went into college and I sat for the CLEP test, which is like the advanced placement test. And without studying, I passed all of English. So I had no English in college. And it showed. By the time I got into graduate school, I was in trouble with my writing because I missed college English. And so I had to learn to write very fast and quick in college or graduate school because I was, you know, had a problem with it. But what you see my writing skill today is all self-taught, all self-taught. Have I managed writing my Sherry story legally? How many lawyers have warned you about talking? Yeah, Isabel MacArthur, actually, I actually talked to an attorney. I actually spoke to two. I have one on retainer. I do know what my risks are when it comes to right to privacy. That's the big one most of us don't hear about. Most of us know about libel and slander, which we think, well, if I tell the truth, then there's no problem. Well, actually, there is a problem. You can tell the truth and still get in. It's not having what is the gray rock is cooking. That's actually not true. If you don't name names, you're still not safe. You're always at risk. You're always at risk because every person has a right to their own privacy. And so the things that I tell in my book, he has a right to being kept private. I know that. I understand that. And I, though, feel I have a right to share my story. So he could sue me. That is true. He can sue me. But I also know that if he does, his name will go out public and everybody will know who he is. And I also know that I can prove it happened. So he will then have all of that spilled across the whole world that he really did do these things. I have text messages and photos and letters and all sorts of crap that he doesn't want exposed. So that's what protects me is, yes, am I at risk? Sure, I'm at risk, but he's at risk too. And generally in those cases, people don't want to take that risk who have a lot to hide. They're not willing to go ahead and say, yeah, you shouldn't have wrote my story or wrote about us. Because once they do, then there's nothing secret about their life. I can then name him and come out and show you photos, and he doesn't want that. So yeah, I understand that I'm taking a risk. And yes, I did consult an attorney, and I would highly recommend anybody thinking about doing that, please consult an attorney. That's such a good advice. Yeah, it is interesting. So Jay Prince says, it's interesting as a clinician that we're susceptible to narcissistic abuse. What I have found, here's one of my theories about why narcissist and antisocial personality disorders still are very fascinated with psychologists and mental health clinicians is because think of it this way. So when it's somebody who is a serial, someone who's like very dangerous, like a Ted Bundy or a Gacy, or I'm thinking, all those Dahmers, those individuals get bored. After a while, they kind of get bored because they like novelty. One of the problems with a toxic personality is the extreme need for novelty. And over time, that loses its novelty. So they want to increase the thrill of it. Well, one of the ways to make it really thrilling is to then start to tease and toy with the FBI in a case of a person like a Bundy or a Gacy or a Dahmer. Well, when it comes to narcissistic abuse, how do you increase novelty when you've gotten really good at mastering getting people into a relationship with you that they shouldn't? Well, you start to play around with clinicians who are supposedly experts at identifying toxic behavior and toxic people, right? That would be a big thrill. So I know that mine actually was very intrigued by being a psychologist. And I've since I've been out of this relationship, a lot of my clinician friends have been in very toxic relationships. They've admitted to me on the side that they have gotten out of one or have been in one or they're in one now. So I think that we need as clinicians to be on the lookout that a certain type of predator will see us as a fascinating target. So we need to be really, really aware of that. Yeah, Muriel asked, but Brenda Williams, I appreciate this reminder, Brenda, that she reminds everyone to make sure your clinician keeps your therapy sessions confidential. Absolutely. I totally agree. You never want to hear any mention of it, not in any remote way. We are obligated by law to protect your privacy. So please, if you have anybody that breaches that, that's a serious offense. It not only is a breach of trust. I don't know how you could ever go forward with that clinician, but it's also a breach of a contract between you and that individual. So yeah, I totally agree. Mariel asks, when I disclosed to a person had hurt me, a friend said, have you confronted the abuser? What did this person say? Should I confront my abuser? And I felt like I was supposed to agree with this person. I think that's a mistake, Mariel. I think confronting an abusive person gets you nowhere, because if you guys, I don't know if you guys watched it was last week or the week before. I'm trying to remember what week it was. I talked about responsibility avoidant behaviors that Dr. George Simon in his book Character Disturbance mentions. I think it's like 12 different responsibility avoidant behaviors. The assumption that the public's making when they urge us to talk to our abusers is that everybody is reasonable and we want things to work out to a good end, and that there's a collaborative effort towards that end. And that's not true. Abusive people are not collaborative, they're competitive, and they're very predatorial. So that your friend's assumption is wrong. I think your friend is actually projecting their own fears that if you had an issue with them, that you wouldn't go to them. But anybody should know that you're a reasonable person, and if there's tension between you and the other person, you're going to go to that person. It's only when you're feeling like there's like real threat that you're not going to go to that individual. So that's a situation where what happens in those cases that is the toxic predatory person sounds like they're making changes, but it's actually a form of manipulation. They're just actually getting you off their back. Oh, thank you so much for that gift. I really appreciate that, Louise and Tanya. So be really, really careful that that is not somebody just trying to get you off their back, telling you what you want to hear. So many of us have stayed too long in these relationships or put ourselves back at risk, thinking that things can be worked out, talked through, when only all it did was open us back up for manipulation with that individual. So as much as maybe your friend is trying to be well-meaning, that is not good advice. That's dangerous advice. So I'd really, really be careful about that. So Mobius asked me, how do I counter my wife taking every picture with my image on it down? My 14-year-old lives with us. I'm curious, Mobius, if you could follow up and ask a little bit more or tell me a little bit more about taking your photos down from where, like on the wall or from social media? And what's the excuse that your partner is giving when they do that? I'd be curious to say, how are they justifying it? Because that's kind of a strange thing to be doing. To me, I'll tell you, my reaction to hearing that question is that this is a hostile act. It's like a covert aggressive act. This person, your wife is saying, I'm angry with you, but instead of dealing with you directly, they're dealing with you in this offhanded way. So I'd really love to know, off the house walls and fridge. So why? What's your wife saying? Why did they do that? Will the steps be available as a list, Kerry, to please refer back to? You know, it isn't a list, but that's a good suggestion. I could turn it into a list of those. Actually, there was more steps to it. There were a lot. I decided I didn't have time to go through all of them, but yeah, that's a really great point. I can do, curious Vanette. I can certainly make that a list and put that out for all of you to download, anybody who wants that. That's a really great suggestion. I appreciate it. So what other things have you guys encountered that has caused you to really struggle finding good help? You know, what has been your top obstacle? Now, here's another one. I have a feeling a lot of you are saying money. That was partly in yesterday's email, but that was yesterday's email mostly was really talking about mind bloom as a possibility. But yeah, that was part of it. But I would be curious, what have you guys ran into trouble? Like, I think finance is a big one, which is there are free resources. I do think tapping into all the like podcasts and YouTube channels, but I want to say the caveat is please know who you're listening to. Even when I go out trying to find resources to add to whatever that I'm adding to, you know, when, like, for example, if I do a curriculum, right now we're finishing up the trauma bond recovery curriculum. I always make sure that I know who I'm suggesting you guys listen to. I don't just pick anybody, because not anybody's advice is good. There's a lot of people who really are just giving you pop psychology. They're not actually giving you real helpful stuff. So yeah, Heather, that's a great question. Someone wants to know how to sign up for my newsletter. So I want to tell you, my newsletter has two parts to it. There's a free part and then there's a paid part. And the paid part includes the podcast extra interview, which is an exclusive interview that I do not release publicly. You can get it through YouTube by becoming a subscriber. A high-level subscriber gets immediate access to those exclusive videos. I also release those exclusive videos on Instagram. I'm not very consistent over there because it's really hard to upload them, but you get them every week as long as on YouTube as well as on a Substack newsletter. That's the best way to get it, a Substack newsletter. So there's a big free part of it, and then there's a smaller paid part of it, which is usually the best part. The paid part is $5 a month or $50 for a year. And again, if you guys ask me, you know, please, hey, I can't afford it, but I'd really like that, I would add you to the list, give you a complimentary lifetime subscription to it. It's not, I mean, I need it to help support the podcast. That's what you're doing when you do that. You're actually helping me because I'm actually, that podcast, by the way, I'm in the negative a couple $100 every month. So I don't make money on the podcast. I'm actually in the hole. So it's an act of love. So it's your way of helping me create that podcast so that I can afford to hire the help and not to be buried by the amount of work that I've got. So yeah, so is the trauma bond recovery group coaching for folks who are still in their controlling relationship trying to break it? It is. It is for those who are in a relationship actively right now and don't know what to do, and also for those who are who are out and find themselves can't stop thinking about this person or can't stop being controlled by this person. So it doesn't matter if you're in or out of the relationship, it's still helpful for you. And I want you to know, guys, that Lisa and I do not have a bias that you need to leave this relationship. I know a lot of people start to feel scared, like, what if I go do this group? Are you going to make me want to leave? I remember, in fact, I fired a therapist for this. I had a clinician who was pressuring me to leave my partner. And I wasn't ready to leave. I didn't have a place to go. I was living in another country. I wasn't fluent in that language. I could tell this therapist had an agenda, and I fired her for having the agenda. I want you to know I don't have an agenda. I want to support you being your healthiest, whatever that looks like, whatever that looks like. So yeah, if you guys would like more help breaking the trauma bond, please check out the Trauma Bond Recovery Group Coaching. Starts January 8th. It's Wednesday afternoons at 3 p.m. It goes for 75 minutes. It's going to be amazing. Lisa, Sunny, and I we're doing that together. So Muriel asks, why do people want to wrap up abusers' feelings in bubble wrap? Muriel, I would love to know that. I don't really understand why either. It's amazing because we're willing to trash victims. I saw that firsthand when I shared my 29-part series on how I met, married, and got scammed by a gold digger. The abuse I took directly was a hard hit. I only posted it on TikTok, and I actually kind of glad that I did, because the amount of abuse was so bad that after a week or two in, I was bawling. I was sobbing. It was so horrible. And the women were the worst. I thought men would be bad, but it was the women who came for me. I don't know why we do that. I think part of it is that we are deeply afraid of being a victim. I think that we also think people ask for it. In fact, somebody just recently put on one of my videos. First time you get traumatized, you're a trauma victim. Second time you get traumatized, you're a volunteer. What? I mean, okay, let's just even stop and look at it logically. Okay, for those of you who know my story, my first victimization happened when I could barely speak. I was only a toddler. That was the first time I was victimized. I was a toddler. So I was a victim when I was a toddler, but every other occurrence since I was toddlerhood, I'm now a volunteer? How does that even make sense? I didn't even know I was being victimized until I got out of this relationship. Seriously. So I'm talking 5 years ago, I put it together. Oh, my soul. I've been victimized my whole life, and I need to really do something massively different. So I've been a volunteer for that entire time? This doesn't even make sense. People's comments don't even make sense. I think the other thing is we just don't understand the degree that there are people who are that sophisticated. Like, think about it for a minute. Who did Bernie Madoff fool? Who did he take advantage of? Other millionaires, right? Mostly the wealthy, mostly sophisticated investors, right? So he bilked millions from very sophisticated people who understood all the language of investment. That's who he took advantage of. And you're saying they were a volunteer? No, it's saying he's that good. I think that's what makes us scared. I think recognizing there are people whose level of predation is so high that we can't spot them, even when we're an expert in that arena, scares the living shit out of us. And we don't like it. So we'd rather than trash victims than to go after the abuser. We'd rather say the abuser just happened to be an inept person who got super lucky, and the victim was the stupid fool who should have seen it coming a 1,000 miles away. I think that's why we do it. I think the idea that we live in a more dangerous world than we'd like to think that we live in is so uncomfortable that we're willing to just be cruel to victims. And I also think that a lot of times our hostility that we have towards victims is a reflection of the hostility that we feel towards ourselves for what we've gotten into, that we feel for our own failures and our losses and pains. And I think there's a third category, Muriel. I think the third category is there are a group of people who are doing that, who are toxic people, and they're doing it to throw us off the scent. They're doing it to make us, it's just more of the manipulation. That's what you get in the abusive relationship. Now you're getting it from the abusive people around you, because God forbid we focus at where it needs to be focused, because that then means they would be held responsible and they don't want to be held responsible. So I think it's for lots of different reasons that people are like that, but we are cruel. I mean, like cruel to victims. So Tammy said, I have a different situation. My ex doesn't seem to care, like has nothing to lose. And he's escalated again after the kids when I was in an accident. And I feel like I have both a traumatic narcissistic abuse, but I also have brain injury. And she's had more. And I really feel like I'm stuck and I need help, but I don't know what to do to get help. So I hope you just heard me say, Tammy, reach out to me at my email directly at hello. It's hello at kerrymcavoyphd.com. So again, let me say that again. Hello at kerrymcavoyphd.com. I'd be happy to give you a free year, or actually I'd be happy to give you it for your lifetime. So Tammy, just reach out and request that. I'd be happy to add you to that newsletter. Anybody who wants to do that, please just reach out. And if you don't have the money, I'm going to take this just as an assumption that you say I don't. I'm assuming that you don't. Okay, Nocturnal says, Nocturne says, does having autism affect how therapy works for you, or do autistic victims need a different type of therapy? Now, I am autistic, and I've had a lot of therapy in my life. That's one of the requirements of being a clinician, is my school required me to have a year's worth of therapy, but I also had therapy off and on for other reasons. So I don't think it's affected me. Now, I do know that some people do tend to be more literal, so they will struggle. They may seem to the therapist like they're like challenging the therapist about everything because they're so literal. I have high functioning autism as well, that they're so literal about everything that they just sort of do that. But I think if you walked into a therapist and said, listen, I have autism, but I've been victimized, that they'll understand. I want you to know that a lot of people in my toxic free relationship club are also autistic. That it seems to be a haven for them. So that might be another thing for you to think about, is joining that and getting group coaching through that is a safe place to find a lot of support. How often have you seen autism and narcissism be in the same person? I hear that it's growing. I don't really know. That's a great question. I don't think they're actually anywhere near each other, but they do sometimes look a little like each other. But I do think there's a growing group of people who are saying they're autistic when they're actually narcissistic. And thank you so much for subscribing, by the way, right now. I just really appreciate it. I do think that's become a popular thing, that narcissists who say, oh, I have empathy problem. I'm literal and black and white thinking, then I must be autistic, instead of them seeing themselves as that, no, this is a problem with narcissism, not a problem with autism. Now, autism does the same. So those two symptoms tend to be the same. So autistic person tends to be quite literal in their thinking, more black and white and rigid in their thinking. They have their special interests. There's a whole host of problems that go with autism. And then the narcissism, that kind of like merges. They're similar. And then also there's an empathy problem. Now, autistic people have a lot of feelings, and they have a lot of feelings for other people. They're not actually lacking in empathy. They just may not always know how to convey the empathy, because they're struggling with knowing how to connect in it socially and show empathy. So it may come off as stiff and abrupt or cold, when actually there's a great level of concern about other people. But I do think that there can be crossovers, just because there's crossovers for everything. So one of the errors that we make, and I see this commonly, we make the assumption that if you have depression, you don't have another condition, it's just depression. No, you can have depression and also have other things. You can be a narcissist and also be depressed and have anxiety. You can be schizophrenic. You can have like multiple diagnoses at the same time. In other words, having a diagnosis does not lock you out of other diagnoses. It doesn't. So can you be autistic and narcissistic? Yeah. But because you're but I do see there are people who are narcissistic who are now claiming to be autistic as a way to sort of excuse their behavior. But here's the big critical difference. Autistic people are not manipulative. They're not being exploitive. They're not avoiding conversations because they want to like shut you down. They may avoid a conversation because it's overwhelming and loaded. But if you say to them, hey, I'm not finished, this really hurts me, I need to wrap this up, they'll come back and wrap it up with you. My sons are autistic. I live in a family of autistic people, and I'll tell you, there's not manipulation going on. There's a lot of sensitivity happening between us. Okay, wait, say what part again? What part did you want me to say again? Is it possible to be also autistic and antisocial personality disorder? Absolutely. Yes, you can have multiple diagnoses. It's very, very possible. So I'm about ready to wrap it up because I'm going to need to jump over to my group. So Arrow Matrix 3, I'm waiting for you to see what it is that you want me to say again, and then I will wrap it up for today. Next week, I want to tell you why I'm waiting for this her or him to write that comment. Next week, we are going to be focusing on, I'm very excited about it, by the way. It's a great topic. I just prepared for it. So let me tell you what it is. So I always go, you guys know, I always know a week in advance what we're going to be talking about. So next week is going to be talking about why telling someone to just leave is terrible advice and how narcissistic people keep us trapped. So that's what we're going to be talking about next week. So we're going to talk about why just leave is terrible advice and why and how narcissistic people keep us trapped. So I'm super excited about that. So what is the indicator between antisocial and narcissistic? The difference, okay, autism doesn't manipulate. You say that. Autism doesn't manipulate. Okay, let me stand back for a second. Because are you autistic? If you're autistic, you're being very literal. Because we do that, we're very literal. What I mean is, autistic people don't on purpose contrive every relationship to be an effort of manipulation and deception. Can they be manipulative? Absolutely. We're all manipulative. We're manipulative all the time. We've been manipulative here with each other. So yes, people are manipulative. What do I mean by that? It means like we want people, like even when you're writing a comment, that's a little form of, hey, please see me. I want you to see me. I mean, yeah, some of you really want me to see you because maybe you're fanning a little bit, but some of you just have sincere questions. But there's secondary gains, and that's being seen and perceived by somebody. So manipulation, if you broadly categorize it, is any effort to sort of get something from somebody else that maybe they in that moment didn't want to give you. But what I mean when I said that, what I was literally talking about is a narcissist. Like if you look at the continuum of narcissism, narcissists are people who are disingenuous, who are responsibility avoidant. They do not own what they do. They do not apologize, and they will not accept responsibility or blame. And what they do is they manipulate their family and partners and those around them in order to believe that they're not capable of those things while they're actively doing it. That's what I mean. Autism doesn't do that. Autism, for one, the level of sophistication in social cues, social reading, and being able to do that is beyond most autistic people. They can't think that far socially. I had no friends growing up because I didn't know how to do it. I couldn't figure out how to have friends. I didn't know there was I felt like there was some code I couldn't break. So a narcissist, on the other hand, is really rapid. Think of the mean girl on the playground. She's figured it socially out. She's really got it down. She knows exactly what she's doing. That is manipulation. That's the manipulation I'm talking about. Autistic people can't be like that. That's too sophisticated. They're not that good. Whereas narcissists are masterful at it. They come out almost like born that way. That's what I mean. So I wasn't being black and white saying that an autistic person never manipulates. Sure, we all do. Everybody does. But I mean the toxic, conniving, dirty manipulation that takes from somebody else in a way that they don't want to be taken from. That's what I'm talking about. All right, you guys, this was awesome. Loved the questions. Fantastic questions today. Join me next week, 4 p.m. for why just leaving is terrible advice and how narcissists keep us trapped in a very sophisticated way. So we'll get into all of that next week at Tuesday at 4 p.m. And thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciated it.